The digital infrastructure makes so much of this go because it makes it possible for you to centralize an unbelievable amount of stuff and do it through the systems without people realizing. So there were 7,000 people working for me when I was Assistant Secretary of Housing, and I assure you, the only guys who were in on the deal were a very few number of accountants and IT guys. I've gone back and kind of unpacked it. But this is what makes it go, and part of it is because the government is run by private banks and private corporations, and they are absolutely non-transparent, and a lot of it is behind this national security law, including the national security waiver. I cannot tell you how important the destruction and suppression of place-based financial statements like Community Wizard was. So if you want to undo the trance between reality and the official reality, one thing you can do is network within your place and start to figure out how the money works and where the opportunity is to reverse it. Because the opportunities to build new income and jobs, both small business and entrepreneurs, is incredible, and get the real estate, the value of the real estate up. Very important PowerPoint, centralized control of payments and systems. I'm always having fights with financial people who say, oh, the US dollar is going to crash tomorrow and the Chinese currency is going to take. That's ridiculous. The Chinese don't have a global satellite system. You know, the backbone for the financial system are cables that run under the ocean, clearing systems, the internet, which are more and more moving onto the internet platform, and the satellites. Okay, so he who controls the sea lane and the satellite lanes controls the global currency. Okay, now you need more and more violence to do that, and we've used plenty up till now. But that's why you see in action, you know, in reaction to the Snowden revelations, you see more and more people saying, you know, Brazil, Putin saying, we're gonna set up our own clearing and payment systems. We want to be able to clear and do transactions around this system, and it's not just the dollar; it's around those payment systems. When the sanctions started, everybody was talking about Putin can't buy a Coke with a Visa in Moscow without the CIA knowing it within, you know, 10 seconds. And in fact, that's true. And so you see Putin now passing legislation so he can set up local payment systems, and Visa and MasterCard, et cetera, can't do that. Globalized satellite systems over the next 10 years, one of the reasons you're seeing so much emphasis on encouraging people to get interested in space is the competition. As financial transactions and the global currency moves onto the internet platform, the squabble and the issues over managing the suborbital platform are going to be enormous, okay? And so space is going to get unbelievably important in the overt economy, not to mention what's going on in the covert. And of course we know with the Patriot Act, smartphones, cell towers, the Internet of Things, everything is getting much more invasive. The one-way mirror.
So this is actually 2015 or 2014.
So much has happened since then. It's incredible. Yeah. And she has talked about stuff like this in the past, where she was on a panel. I'm forgetting everyone who was on it. Maybe Zechariah Sitchin, but I think at least Richard Dolan was in it.
Yeah.
And she said something where she was like, I don't even know if there are real extraterrestrials. And I don't know if she's changed her opinion on this, but she's I think she's religious, maybe Christian, Catholic, something like that.
Christian. She talks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she said when she was in office, it was even offered to her like, hey, do you want to meet an alien for lunch? And everyone laughed at it. And she was just like, I know, sounds super funny, but legitimately this was a very legitimate like chat. And I forget exactly what conversation or topic she was talking about before that, but she was like, listen, I'm really worried that this is being built up as something that it isn't. So, you know, as I still get people in the chats over here talking about like, you know, what do you think about this UFO thing? It's on 60 Minutes now. Everyone's talking about it. Why now? Why is it so like, oh, well, let's just start, you know, carte blanche? Is it because everyone can handle it now that we've already dealt with so much of what's happening with COVID? You know, like why now? And it's super interesting. And I'm not going to go deeply into that, but I'm super curious about Catherine Austin Fitz's maybe her thoughts on, and this is why we just have to get her on the show, her thoughts on why 60 Minutes is covering all this now and what all this means. Because she said in that what we just watched, eyes on satellites, eyes on outer space. And a lot of what we're talking about when we're talking about space might have to do with exactly what she was talking about, not just the movement of money and stuff like that, but we see blockchain as being like, oh, that is going to be the future. So all money and all transactions now have to be pushed onto this. And we see with Starlink and I forget the Bezos version of it, but all these satellites going up in the air. And so the Internet of Things also very much so evolving.
Yeah.
So think about it in an embryonic sense. It went from its like first stage almost to its second trimester just recently.
Yeah.
And so I definitely find this interesting because I've been focusing a lot on just basically what she's talking about. 5G moving to 6G, all genomics being classified, categorized, sequenced, and put in, basically BGI group, and on the International Barcode of Life, where pretty much all data and sensors everywhere and all data accessible.
Mhm.
So I'm just really curious about that. Is there more where she goes deeper into the Internet of Things, or is that basically the most she went into that?
Not as much in this presentation, but she has
Okay.
spoken with like dark journalists, who's a YouTuber, has had her on a few times, and Dolan a little bit about, she's very much against the technocracy and this idea of a technocratic elite trying to pull off some agenda based around this sort of technocratic worldview. Very much this automated, very unhumanistic kind of approach, and she's very much against the technocratic kind of takeover idea, as well as I think I have seen her touch on a little bit of just like she is familiar with von Braun's statement and the Fairchild industry statement.
Yep.
I'm blanking on the woman who worked for them, but basically, the last threat will be ET.
In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now, at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids, we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. A lie. I think I was too naive to know at that time the seriousness of the nature of the spin that was being put on the system. And now the pieces are starting to fall into place. We're building a space-based weapon system based on a premise that is a lie, a spin. And Wernher von Braun was trying to hint that to me back in the early 70s and right up until the moment when he died in 1977. What he told me is that there's an accelerated effort in place. He didn't mention a timeline, but he said that it was going to be speeding up faster than anybody could possibly imagine. That the effort to put weapons in space was not only based on a lie, but would accelerate past the point of people even understanding it until it was already up there and too late. When von Braun was dying in front of me the very first day that I met him, he had tubes draining out of his side. And he was tapping on the desk telling me, "You will come to Fairchild." I was a school teacher. "You will come to Fairchild and you will be responsible for keeping weapons out of space." And the way he said it with the intenseness in his eyes, and added that very first day, the first time I met him, that space-based weapons were a dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, untestable, unworkable idea. And that the last card that was being held was the extraterrestrial enemy card. The intensity with which he said that made me realize that he knew something that he was too afraid to mention. He was too afraid to talk about it. He would not tell me the details. I'm not sure that I would have absorbed them if he had told me the details or even believed him in 1974. But there was no question that that man knew and had a need to know, I found out later.
And like we said earlier, and people should go and watch that first episode. We dive deep into it. But basically, like, I do think that's always that is definitely a possibility. I don't think that's an inevitability, right? I think we have an ability to shift and not allow that to occur. But essentially, I think, it was inevitable that they were going to have to tell us some pieces of what's going on in outer space and what we're seeing, right? And I think now they've been a little bit forced to. When you really look at how this all was brought out, it wasn't like they wanted it to really come out. Like I showed you that clip, and like I said,
Totally.
go watch it. But it doesn't mean they're not naive to. We had to control the narrative, right? And if this is going to come out, fine. We were ready for this. They're always usually pretty prepared for most scenarios, and yeah, there's probably a strong possibility that people in the military industrial complex who are the people that would want to have a psychological operation, that would want to have a fake ET invasion to justify spending infinite money with this new war on space, just like a war on terror or a war on communism. Like, this is their new way for it to reign. So then they can say, well, we need to make umbrellas. We need to make spaceships that look, and I'm all for having like self-defense and having our planet protected from hostile forces, just like I am domestically having a strong. It's just different when we start becoming on the offensive and we want to try to go out and start saying like, then you get into like, are they actually a real threat? And who you're classifying this certain race now maybe as the threat. And yeah, I do think there are some bad guys out there. Like, I'm not of the Dr. Greer group that's like, it's all good. And I'm not of the Dr. Jacobs group where it's all bad. I'm in the middle, neutral, kind of similar to Dolan, where it's like, I think there's some good guys and there's some bad guys, ETs, and I think there's some neutral ones. But yeah, we should be smart about defending against the bad ones, but we shouldn't also immediately think they're all bad and then, get ourselves in this situation where now we don't even have the possibility to have a cultural diplomatic exchange with advanced intelligence. And now we don't have a possibility to become like this Star Trek version of humanity where we're exploring and it's for science and all these beautiful things to expand our notions of humanity and what we can do and who we can interact with. I don't want to go down, as we talked about, that fear path that they're going to probably try to sell us on, a certain select group of be afraid, be terrified, justify a lot of money towards this, and just like sit back and let us handle fighting these bad negative ETs, and so yeah, I think multiple camps probably exist. There's multiple competing agendas behind the scenes for what it looks like, but all we can do is what we have control over, and to the best of my ability, I'm going to embody and try to help people get educated. So we go down the more loving path of not having that sort of pessimistic, fearful approach to all ET and justify war.
It's interesting. Yeah, man, it's interesting because and I'll just end it on this, but like, if you think back to, I think Trump was still in office and it came out that there was an Israeli space commander that came out and said, ETs are among us. Trump knows about it. The U.S. administration knows about it. We know about it. We've been in contact with them, and they will not make their presence known until we learn how to not be so violent towards one another. And what's interesting about that is that, like, I took a look at that and I was like, okay, I wonder what that's about. Okay, that's Israel. That's Trump. That's very interesting. Like, Trump and Israel are talking to ETs and they're not going to make their presence known. And it got kind of washed away because it was connected to Trump and Israel. And I'm just super curious about, like, where are these narratives coming from? Because that was on the news as well. And are there competing narratives to spin where this is going as well? Or is it one united front? Because it feels divided to me as well.
And I would stand out on a ledge and say I really strongly feel that's the case. I mean, there's just so much evidence to back up that theory versus that it's all united. Because you are seeing mixed messages. You're seeing mixed white hats. You're seeing, look, I'm not saying Mellon's perfect or Ella Lozano are perfect with their agenda and it's completely humanist, but bottom line is they are representing a different narrative than what you see a lot of the people within still the mainstream sort of Pentagon, DOD. And like I said, go watch our earlier stuff showing how this whole process was like, they didn't want these things to be released. These were done at the very last stages of when these people worked at in these committees and on these groups. And they did it in a way where they were smart. They weren't going to get in trouble with classified versus unclassified and all these things. But that really is where I'm led to believe that there's competing agenda. So like, let's work with the good group and the good agenda people, but also hold them accountable where we start to maybe see them go astray with, our original intentions as a collective. But so moving forward now, though, she's going to hit on some key things that are on public news. So once again, this is another thing you can show anybody who's skeptical of these things. Like, look, this is national news. These are senators and congressmen saying these things, and this is not fringe. This is just in your face, straight up, what's going on.
Pentagon, the day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared war, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
Rumsfeld promised change, but the next day, the world changed. And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten.
My 03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
First question. My second question, Mr. Secretary, according to the Comptroller General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon, to which Mr. Cooper alluded. Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the #1 reason why the government can't balance its checkbook. The Pentagon has claimed year after year that the reason it can't account for the money is because its computers don't communicate with each other. My second question, Mr. Secretary, is who has the contracts today to make those systems communicate with each other? How long have they had those contracts? And how much have the taxpayers paid for them? Finally, Mr. Secretary, after the last hearing, I thought that my office was promised a written response to my question regarding the 4 war games on September 11th. I have not yet received that response, but would like for you to respond to the questions that I've put to you today, and then I do expect the written response to my previous question, hopefully by the end of the week. Question, please.
The second question, I've forgotten what the second question was.
I think Ms. Jonas knows it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. I appreciate the question. I appreciate your interest in our department's financial condition, and we are working very hard on that program. I've just come back recently.
I understand that you're working hard on it, but my question was, who has the contract? How long have they had that contract, and how much money have we spent on it?
In general, we spend about $20 billion in the Department on Information Technology Systems. The accounting systems are part of that. I can get you the exact number for the record of what we spend on our current, what we call legacy systems, and those that we're moving toward.
And who has the contracts?
That would be a multitude of individuals.
Could you name some, please?
Well, I think off the top of my head, well, I would rather not. I'd rather provide that for the record.
That's not privileged information, is it?
I'm sure it's not.
Well, please. And we still have time, so please.
I would be glad to provide for the record. I don't want to talk my.
Okay, so she doesn't provide for the record. We don't know who the contractors are, and this goes again into blatantly in your face. This open lack of transparency and accountability around. Look, when you look at the United States budget, the vast majority is going towards defense. We spend more than like the next 6 or 8 countries combined. So it's a pretty important part of our budget we should be pretty familiar with and have a lot of accountability and transparency on. Yet it's probably the one that has the least amount of transparency and accountability. And as she's asking the woman, who are the contractors? They're not telling him. Why is this privy? These are senators, congressmen, presidents, people in the positions who should be in the know and should be given this stuff being blocked. And this is when you start getting into this idea of like, okay, well, who really has more power? This idea of a deep state. Is there a unaccountable, unelected group of people who we know, this permanent state of national security that don't really answer to people who are in positions of power we think they would be answering to, right? And this is just a perfect example of that on display.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, so I've seen that video before. That was on Solari Report. And man, I'm just weighing in my head whether I should even start opening a can of worms. But I would just encourage everybody to go to Solari Report and dig through that, because there's this video that I did a lot of talking on from, let me see if I don't butcher her name, Ulrike Granocher, and she's German. And she talks a lot about Peter Gayayev and a lot of the technology that's being brought up in, I believe, mainly the United States, but then also in Japan, and different things having to do with genetics and teleportation and also satellite technology. So I'll stop there because that's a tangent. That's a whole other show. But this is the stuff that Catherine Austin Fitts is getting into when she's really looking at, like, I want to know where some of this money is going, and I want to know what some of this technology is being built for. And so just imagine the technology that's being built that isn't being covered by people like Catherine Austin Fitts. The stuff that is not like, oh, dang, it leaked, but we'll just come up with another narrative for it. Stuff that hasn't been leaked yet. So it's super interesting, but just, sticking to the point.
Yeah. And we'll jump back to the next clip, and that's where she and Dolan really found a lot of crossover, and they really were like, oh my God, like that's the missing piece I needed. I needed the financial piece. I needed the asset piece. And Dolan really helped provide her with, like, deep underground military bases, how much money is being made by these mining and elevator companies, and, you start to follow, like, oh, how are, that's where she gets into, and we'll play the clip later, but like this type of money is being used to build massive infrastructure of deep underground military bases, massive infrastructure and things to be built, like possibly spaceships and these things where sounds a little far out, but you would need that type of money to actually be building these massive things. And as far as, other technologies and things in the realm of like alternative energy or 0-point energy, or, things you're talking about, we would consider almost, magical. Look, like, I don't have as much evidence with specifics on that as much, and there are some whistleblowers that touch on that, but the bottom line is, like, this is pretty much a blank check. And these people don't have to answer to SEC, Congressman, or anyone to be like, hey, this is what we're working on. This is where we're maybe being a little bit immoral or unethical. Like, none of that's coming up in their equation of how they approach this. So she continues on, though, with this congressman blowing this up.
Thank you very much for joining us for Happy Hour. I saw you quoted, you're using the analogy to the birth of Christ, that we wouldn't have spent as much money since his birth, that this big old bailout. Very interesting to come up with that.
Well, it's even worse than that. If we spent $1 million a day every day since the birth of Christ, we wouldn't get to $1 trillion. And we're likely to lose far more than that. Having $23.7 trillion at risk basically is about 1.5 times all the money that every man, woman, and child in America produces. The entire gross domestic product is only about $17 trillion. So this is an amazing amount of money at risk, and it's okay to have it at risk in order to get America moving again. What's not okay is what we're going to hear from the special IG tomorrow, which is he's being locked out of any kind of oversight, reporting, transparency, all the things we were promised. He's
missing, Ed, is this. We had...
Okay, so he was just talking about the bailouts that Treasury did during the financial crisis. So Cynthia McKinney testimony, I think, was around 2003, 2004. We move up a couple years to the bailout period, and we have Treasury do an incredible amount of bailouts, but we also have the Federal Reserve in on the game, so we have Representative Grayson.
National tragedy, an economic disaster that took place barely a year ago. In the last 18 months of the Bush administration, America lost $12 trillion on its net worth. That's $40,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. And I cannot think of a single person who's held responsible for that. Nobody in government, nobody on Wall Street, nobody nowhere. That's the fundamental problem right now. And if people on Wall Street are going to continue to get great bonuses in good times and in bad times, we can kiss this economy goodbye. It's not going to work. In capitalism, winners have to win and losers have to lose. And nobody's been held responsible for that enormous erosion. 20% of our accumulated wealth over the course of 2 centuries gone in 18 months. Nobody's been punished for that. That's the problem.
Altogether, $26 trillion of bailouts just in those 2 categories, not including TARP, not including FDIC financing of U.S. institutions. $26 trillion, that's almost $100,000 for every man, woman, and child in America, all done by the Federal Reserve without any act of Congress authorizing it.
All right. There's a lot of numbers thrown around here, and sometimes when you just hear it abstractly, 13 billion sounds like it's larger than 7 trillion. Which of all of these numbers, which outrages you the most and which should outrage the public the most?
I think that we can all agree the trillions of dollars that were extended by the Federal Reserve to the banks in the form of corporate welfare. What they did is they took our money, the U.S. dollar, the fact that they control the currency, the fact that they have control of the money supply, and for the first time in history, and I'm talking about in the 100-year history of the Federal Reserve, they played favorites. They said, we'll give $100 trillion to this institution, $100 billion to this institution, another $100 billion to this institution, and so on down the line, when you and I couldn't even come close to accessing that kind of money on those terms. They lent out this money at 0.01%. 0.01% interest. 0.01% interest. Go try to get a loan like that from your bank. Bloomberg's report that there are trillions of dollars in off-balance sheets transactions that the Federal Reserve has entered into since last September. Are you familiar with those off-balance sheet transactions?
You know, I think it may be important at this point, too, just to bring up a certain aspect related to our jurisdiction. And just to clarify perhaps some of my earlier comments, we are the Inspector General for the Board of Governors, and we have direct oversight over board programs and operations, and are also able to look at board-delegated functions to the reserve banks, as well as the board's oversight and supervision of the reserve banks. We do not have jurisdiction to directly go out and audit reserve bank activities.
Okay, so what you just said is, if the Exchange Stabilization Fund and the New York Fed are using the federal credit and all sorts of slush funds to manipulate the markets and send enormous amounts of money abroad to foreign banks, that's outside of our scope. Anyway.
Once again, Inspector General working, with the governors of the banks, outside of our scope. This is another obvious blaring thing of accountability, transparency. Why are they outside your scope? Why are we allowing this to occur? Why are we allowing this type of systemic design to be in place? That clearly would allow for corruption to happen very easily, right? None of the people, when we come hip to this, we go, yeah, this is not a good idea. Most rational person, most normal lay person would be like, yeah, it's like not a good idea. But if you're benefiting from it and you're in that corrupt system, then yeah, you love it. You're reaping all the rewards. You're living high on life, and this is just where, once again, we don't have to get into the emotional and angry and just pointing fingers. It's just like, let's just be aware of this. Let's work towards the change. But we can't, like you said, until we look at the darkness and understand, you can't, until you have the purging, you can't come into a strong state of homeostasis and really get to the next stage as an individual and as a collective. And that's what we're doing here is essentially kind of purging and by looking at it. But then let's change, let's integrate, let's transform our collective body.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. And really, the thing is just like, why are these things being allowed? What's so funny is most of us don't know about it, for one.
Yeah.
And I've constantly heard whenever I drop a knowledge bomb on somebody, and they're just like, "Come on, if that were true, everyone would be talking about it." And I'm like, no, because and I'll say it this way, because it's true. There's many narratives wrapped around it to divert your attention towards the Kardashians rather than talking about this. And think of that phenomena that when we don't know how to even listen to what we're hearing most of the times, we need people like you, me, other people to say, hey, look at this. And then let's talk about it for a while just to point out how ridiculous this actually is. So that's why most people aren't talking about it, for one.
Well, and with Operation Mockingbird, we know, and this is what I've just learned getting more and more into independent journalism and an independent media space, is a major job, arguably more important than anything else by legacy and mainstream media, is to omit information. It's what they don't cover. It's what they don't talk about that matters, right? And that's what you're hitting on. Why do we see so many dumb stories that's like, this doesn't really matter? Why are you showing me this constantly on repeat? It's because, like you said, it's the real stuff that matters. They're omitting it and not really touching on because they don't really want us. It's, omitting is just as bad.
Man, you're definitely right. And I don't want this to be like the longest podcast ever, but, the things that we're looking at today. Okay, I'm just going to throw a couple things out there, and I know it's sensitive, especially if you're into the partisan thing, but Hunter Biden's laptop. Okay, media won't touch it until Biden is elected, and now it's okay to talk about. What's another thing that you and I were, the lab leak theory, right? Outrageous conspiracy theories being thrown around. Oh, yeah. And we did know about that. Now we'll talk about it. And now it's much later. Now we'll talk about it.
But it does.
And
happen it does happen on the right as well, and we have to be mindful of that, right? Because that's what people are going to perceive is like, oh, you're just saying only left neoliberal media leaves it out, but both Fox, OAN, Newsmax, they omit things that are just as important and just as bad. So it's all across the board, though.
Not only that, did you see that video where the right-wing media all with the exact same narrative at the exact same tempo being played over one
Sinclair
another.
Broadcasting
That's what it was.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility
is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities, the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about the trouble and trend of irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country. Plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 And look, I know this well.
Right.
Like, I almost worked in local news. Like, Sinclair Broadcasting owns pretty much all local news, and there is very much that video show. They'll send out a daily kind of like, here's how you're gonna read it, and here's the news for today. And that video is hilarious if people don't know what we're talking about. It's literally you're seeing all these different anchor men and women across the country saying verbatim the exact same thing, and they're all being played next to each other, so you hear it all like in a chorus type effect. But it's like, that's kind of a coincidence. Like, they just
And I tried looking, and I'm not saying that left-wing media does not do the same exact thing, but I tried looking at left-wing media, and I didn't find, maybe there wasn't a good enough filmmaker or whatever that put something out on YouTube that was that convincing, but it's across the board. So that's really what, like, and this is why I mentioned ahead of time, like the problem is we keep falling back into, well, how do you label Ben Stewart because he just pointed out two things on the left? Well, he must be alt-right and he just doesn't talk about it. He must love Trump. And like, I've made my position on Trump very clear in several Waking Infinity news. I think he's a puppet unlike other puppets, but a puppet nonetheless, right? He played the ball game slightly different than other people. He didn't start any new wars. Oh, great. Let's give him a round of applause. There were still drone strikes, right? You know what I mean? Like, for every one good thing you could say about Trump, you can find 50 that he didn't do
and
correctly.
Biden's just as bad. Look, we won't get into political game. We'll have a whole other episode and series on just like populism and understanding the political dynamics. And I'm not totally against like not voting and being involved in the process. Like, I'm very much all the above. Like, if you want to just protest in the streets, or if you just want to like abstain from voting, or you want to get involved in the political process, I think all those things can in a way be beneficial towards moving us to a goal we want. But when we say only this way or this way works, and if you're in politics, then you're a shill, and this is exactly what they want. This is divide and conquer. This is making people be painted into ladles. Say, how do I compartmentalize? How do I put you in box so I can understand you? That is exactly what leads to division. It doesn't allow nuance to occur when you do that. You're thinking in absolutes.
Yeah, so that's why I wanted to point out what we're watching with Cynthia McKinney around circa 2003, 2004.
That was right before 9/11. That's 2001, I believe.
Oh, okay, right on.
Yeah,
so
Rumsfeld,
grilling Rumsfeld and grilling these people, and they're still not saying anything relevant. And what happens at the end of that? They all just wipe their hands. They go to lunch. They carry on with their day, and nothing seems to happen.
I'll get back to you on that. I'll get my people to reach out. Oh, but your people never reached out.
And she kept saying, it's like, this isn't privileged information. We have plenty of time. This is the forum. This is your job. Answer the question. And she's like, I don't feel comfortable. And it's just like, who cares if you feel comfortable or don't feel comable? Like,
well, it is privileged information. I think that's the truth. It is actually privileged information. And the girl who's the messenger in that position is like, I feel uncomfortable. And if it wasn't privileged information, she probably would have told him. And so that kind of seems like slightly an invasive maneuver there. But,
but like, so maybe Cynthia McKinney was saying it's not privileged information, and it is. we'd have to go into the definition of what is privileged information, because I feel if there is any forum for that woman to answer that question, it was right then and right there. And so you have to be really careful with like what does privileged information really mean, and when do you say it? Because that seemed like the exact moment where you say it.
This is her just kind of hitting on, though, how the black budget is a primary source of inequality. And this is just important for people to understand overall, like, why we see such inequality in this country. This is a major reason why. It's not the only, but one of the primary sources for sure.
I will tell you is that if you look at how the money works in every household and in every neighborhood in America, in every municipality, in every state hall, the black budget is the source of inequality. We have a centralized system, and it is taking the most powerful technology financed by the taxpayer and shifting it into private hands without, it's sending the liabilities in, but it's taking the assets. So we have a systematic skim of advanced technology and assets. We are creating private endowments with our resources that we don't own or control. One-way mirror, but most important, the power of this group is they have the ability to kill with impunity. And when it comes down to a food fight, if you look at all the Congress people, and there are many, many great government leaders who've tried to do something about this, and they are concerned for their safety and the safety of their families. So one of the issues about real solutions is how do we support them in a way that's effective? Okay, Declaration of Independence, one of my favorite pieces of the law in this country. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Our freedom comes to us by divine authority. Okay? Unfortunately, the Creator did not send enforcement that we could trust. We have to be the enforcement. Okay? Now, I will tell you as a financial matter, because that's my beat, that's what I care about. The Securities Act of 1934 passed, or one of the rules that promulgates that you have beaten into you when you are on Wall Street, is something called Rule 10b-5, and let me read it to you. Rule 10b-5, promulgated under the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, makes it unlawful for any person in connection with the purchase or sale of any security, let me skip to B, to make any untrue statement of a material fact or to omit to state a material fact necessary in order to make the statements made in the light of the circumstances under which they are made not misleading. Now let me tell you what that gibberish means. What that means is if I ask you to put money in something, whether it's a college education or a house or anything else, I am obligated under the law to tell you anything that could impact your assessment of opportunities and risks. If I ask you to buy a house it's not a security, so if I ask you to buy a bond that finances a municipality and I don't tell you that I know that black budget narcotics trafficking is about to wreck the value of that house and the value of that bond, that is a violation of 10b-5. I can go to jail as an investment banker or an investment advisor for doing that. What I have to tell you is with the financial coup d'etat and the integration of that hidden system in the overt financial system, we have reached a point where we have to go there. We have to look at these issues. And I commend you for being here today because you're the people who have had the courage to do this both in the audience and watching over the live stream. You are willing to go there. And we have to go there if we're going to start to bring reality, an official reality, back into something that doesn't give me a headache, okay? It is a material omission not to look at this, and you need to start quietly in whatever way works for you to help the people in your life begin to deal with that. Okay, what can I do? There are millions of things we can do. What you need to do is to reverse the drain in your life, okay? You are being drained by the black budget, okay? You are being drained by this gap between reality and official reality. And the first step is simply to reverse the drain in your life. It's just like they tell you on the planes, put your own oxygen mask on first, because you need more oxygen, and then you can help the guy sitting next to you.
Make sure y'all head over to benjosephstewart.com, become a member. You'll have access to the growing library of deeper dives where I talk about all the stuff that I really can't talk about on YouTube. Make sure you get involved in the Discord chat. That's where a lot of the conversation is happening, talking about new theories, being able to interweave into the greater conversation that is how we awaken infinity. That's our highest potential. And I just want to remind you, you are the most powerful technology ever known to creation. Wield it like an artist with a conscience.